On a medieval battlefield, the deadliest question wasn't how to kill a man. It was who not to kill. In 1356, getting that answer wrong could cost you 3 million gold crowns, more than a whole kingdom earned in a year. Because here's what nobody tells you about knights. On the field, they were nearly invisible to each other, wrapped head to toe in steel, faces sealed behind a slab of iron. Put 10,000 of them in a field, and every single one is a blank. So how did they know? In the noise and the mud and the swinging steel, how did a knight decide in half a second whether the man in front of him was a stranger to kill, a friend to spare, or a rich prize to take alive? They had an answer. A whole hidden system built out of colour, cloth, and memory. And it turned medieval war into something far colder and far more organised than the chaos you are picturing. For the next 20 minutes, I'll walk you through that system, one layer at a time. The problem of the Faceless Knight. The code they painted onto their own bodies to solve it. The strange officials who could read that code better than anyone alive. The cold economics that made reading it worth a fortune. And finally, the day the whole system broke and thousands of men who had already surrendered were killed anyway. Here is the rule that ran underneath all of it. Read the coat of arms and you read a man's price. Stay to the end. That last part, the day the rules died, is one of the darkest hours of the age. If this changes how you picture a knight, subscribe. You will want the next one. Start with the armor. Because the armor is the whole problem. We think of a knight's harness as protection, and it was. By the 1300s, a wealthy knight was sheathed in plate from crown to toe, with layered mail beneath it. Over his head went a great helm, an iron bucket with a narrow slit for the eyes and a few small holes to breathe. It could turn a sword, blunt an arrow, soak the blow of a mace. It also did something nobody planned for. It erased him. Think about what that helmet does. It hides the face. All of it. The eyes, the hair, the expression, the one thing humans use to recognize each other. Now put 5,000 of these men in a wet field at dawn, in fog, in a crush of bodies, everyone shouting, everyone in grey steel. Friend and enemy wear the same plate, forged in the same workshops, bought at the same fairs. From 10 feet away, inside a helmet, your own brother is a stranger. This was not a minor inconvenience. It got men killed by their own side. The sources are full of it. Soldiers cut down by allies who could not tell friend from foe. Whole units turning on each other in the smoke. In more than one battle, a commander was nearly killed by his own troops because nobody could see the man giving the orders. The steel that kept you alive also made you invisible to the people fighting beside you. So a knight carried a question into every fight, and he had about a second to answer it. That shape charging out of the smoke. Is he mine or theirs? Do I strike, or is that a friend? And underneath it, a second question, quieter and greedier, that we will come back to. Is he worth more to me, dead or alive? None of that could be solved with the face, because the face was gone. The answer had to live on the outside of the armor. Big enough to read at a gallop. Clear enough to read in bad light. Unique enough that no two men in that field could ever be confused. Here is the assumption I want to take apart. We picture medieval battle as pure chaos. A mindless scrum, thousands of men hacking blindly with no order to any of it. That is backwards. The chaos was the exact thing they refused to live with. And the fix they built was so good that pieces of it are still bolted onto your life today, on football shirts, on national flags, on the badge of the car you drive. They solved the Faceless Knight by turning him into a billboard. Every surface the man owned became a canvas. His shield, the long cloth coat worn over his armour, the surcoat, which is the literal origin of the phrase coat of arms, the banner carried above him, the cloth draped over his horse, all of it painted in loud, unmistakable colour, each design meaning one thing and one thing only. Man, right here. But what was that design exactly? How do you build a language out of shape and colour that thousands of men can read across a battlefield and almost never get wrong? That language had a name, and it grew so powerful that it outlived the knights entirely, climbed off the battlefield, and ended up on your passport. The language had a name, Heraldry, and it is far more clever than the dusty family cresting you are picturing. It appears in the middle of the 100s. Riders' helmets close over the face, which is not a coincidence. At first, a knight simply picked a bold design for his shield. Within a couple of generations, it hardened into something stricter. The arms became hereditary, passed from father to son like a surname. By 1200, your coat of arms was your identity in law. Take another man's arms for your own, and he could drag you to court over it. And it worked like a real language, with grammar. The colours had names. Red was jewels, blue was azure, black was sable, green was vert. The two metals, gold and silver, were called ore and argent. On top of those went the charges, the shapes. Lions, eagles, crosses, stars, stripes, in fixed arrangements that a trained man could describe out loud in one exact sentence. Here's the detail that mattered, and it is the one that proves this whole thing was built for the battlefield, not for decoration. There was an iron rule called the rule of tincture. You never put a colour on a colour, or a metal on a metal. A red lion never sat on a blue field. It went on gold or silver, always. Why? Contrast. A colour on a metal, or a metal on a colour, stays sharp and readable at a distance, in poor light, at a gallop. Break that rule, and your design turns to mud at 50 paces. That is not an artist's taste. That is a legibility standard, the same logic that puts dark letters on a bright road sign. So think about what a coat of arms actually was. A unique visual ID built from a small fixed alphabet, engineered to be read fast and misread as rarely as possible. It was a barcode. A medieval QR code, stitched in wool and painted on wood, that told you in a single glance which exact human being was locked inside that anonymous steel shell. And people guarded these codes ferociously because a shared symbol could get a man killed. When two families both claimed the same arms, it went to court, and those trials were enormous. In one famous English case in the 1380s, two knights both claimed a blue shield crossed by a gold diagonal band. The dispute dragged on for years. Hundreds of witnesses were summoned to swear whose arms they truly were, including the poet Geoffrey Chaucer, who testified he had seen those arms carried on campaign in France. People treated a coat of arms the way we treat a trademark or a passport. It was proof of who you were, and it was worth years in front of a judge. Read the coat of arms, and you read a man's price.
No voiceover,
because
no
that is what the symbol really
subtitles.
carried. Not just a name, a whole dossier. Your family, your rank, your wealth, your allies, your worth. A trained eye could sweep across a battlefield, pick out one rider in a sea of steel, and instantly know his house, roughly his lands, and the thing that mattered most. Whether he was a nobody or a fortune on horseback. But that only works if someone can actually read it. A code is useless without a reader. And there were thousands of these designs, multiplying with every generation, splitting and combining through marriage into ever more tangled patterns. No single person could hold all of that in their head, except that somebody could. In fact, it was their entire job. They were called heralds. And almost everything you assume about them is wrong. Say the word and you picture a man in a funny hat blowing a trumpet, shouting, "Hear ye, hear ye." That was the costume, not the job. A herald was a walking database of human beings. His skull held thousands of coats of arms. Whose was whose, which family carried which colours, how a design shifted when two houses married. He could look at a shield you had never seen and give you the man's name, his father, and his standing. In an age with no photographs and no files to flick through, the herald was the filing system. He was a search engine made of memory. They wrote it down too, in painted registers called rolls of arms. Long strips of parchment, shield after shield after shield, each one labelled. One English roll that still survives from around 1270 lists over 300 coats of arms in neat rows. It is, quite literally, a directory. A medieval version of a professional network, bound in vellum, where the profile picture is a shield and the whole point is knowing exactly who everyone is. But the strangest thing about a herald was where he was allowed to stand. He was neutral. Protected. A herald in his tabard, the loose coat printed with his lord's arms, could ride between two armies about to slaughter each other and not be touched. Both sides needed him. He carried the messages, the challenges, the terms of surrender. To kill a herald was a deep taboo, close to sacrilege, because he was the one man everyone had agreed to trust. He was a referee walking into the middle of a brawl wearing a shirt that meant nobody hits me. And here is the part that gives me chills. After the battle, when the field went quiet, the heralds walked out among the dead, both sides, together. Their job was to read the bodies. They moved through the wreckage, naming the fallen by the arms on their surcoats and shields, counting the dead, listing the great lords, writing the tally that became the official record of who had died and who had won. The men who catalogued the living were the same men who catalogued the corpses. After one of the most famous battles of the whole age, the heralds of the winning and the losing side met afterwards and agreed together on the count and on the names of the noble dead. Enemies, quietly cross-checking a spreadsheet of the slain. That was the herald's authority. His word on who lay in that mud was simply accepted as the truth. So drop the trumpet image for good. A herald was a data analyst, a referee, a diplomat, and a war reporter, folded into one man in a bright coat. He was the human machinery that made the visual code actually function. Without him, a coat of arms was just decoration. With him, it became a working system of identity, enforced and remembered and written down. Which brings us to the question sitting under all of this. Under the paint, the memory, the neutral men counting the dead. Why? Why build such an elaborate machine just to know a man's name in the middle of a battle? Why did it matter so much whether the rider bearing down on you was Sir this or Lord that? Because his name was money. Read correctly in that half second. His name was the whole difference between a corpse worth nothing and a captive worth more than you would earn in a lifetime. And this is where medieval war stops looking like war at all and starts looking like a business. Medieval war ran on a simple, cold piece of math. A dead enemy is worth nothing. A live one, if he is the right man, is worth a fortune. This was the ransom system, and it was the real economy of the battlefield. When a knight was beaten but not killed, he could yield. He gave his word, his faith, and in that moment he became property. His captor now held the right to ransom him back to his family and his estate for cash. A captured lord was not a body. He was a bill waiting to be paid. And the sums were staggering. When King Richard of England was seized on his way home from Crusade, his ransom was set at 150,000 marks. That was somewhere near 2 to 3 times the entire yearly income of the English crown. To raise it, they taxed the whole kingdom and still felt the strain. Picture roughly 30 tons of silver hauled across Europe to buy back
According
one man.
to the user prompt, there must be no spoken dialogue.
Then there is the number that
Therefore,
broke a country.
No transcription is needed.
In 1356, at the Battle of Poitiers, the English captured the King of France himself, John II. His ransom was set at 3 million gold crowns. France could not pay. The figure was so vast it helped wreck the French treasury, and the king, unable to raise the full sum, in the end went back into captivity in England as a matter of honour and died there. One well-aimed capture had bankrupted the richest kingdom in Europe. Read the coat of arms and you read a man's price. Now you see why that line was literal. This is the whole reason the code existed. The heraldry, the heralds, the obsessive rules, all of it fed this market. You needed to know, instantly, whether the man in front of you was a poor knight worth a modest sum or a duke worth a castle. His shield told you. Your shield told him. The paint was a price tag, and it flips everything you assume about how these men fought. We imagine knights hunting glory, desperate to cut down the enemy champion. The clever ones did the opposite. Killing a rich enemy was, in cold terms, a blunder. You had just destroyed the single most valuable thing on the field. The professional move was to beat him, spare him, and cash him in. At Poitiers, the English took so many wealthy French prisoners that ordinary soldiers were made rich for life in one afternoon. The victorious prince honoured his royal captive by serving him at dinner with his own hands, because a king in your keeping was the greatest prize a fighting man could ever hold. I want you to really feel how strange this is. On that field, a knight was a walking savings bond. Beat him gently enough to collect. It is closer to capturing a rival company's chief executive and billing his board than to anything we would call a battle. If you are seeing the Middle Ages differently now, that is the whole idea, and it is worth a subscribe before the last part. But every market rests on everyone agreeing to the rules. The ransom game only works if both sides play. If your enemy honours the surrender, spares the man who yields, and expects the same from you in turn. For 2 centuries, by and large, the knightly class did exactly that, because they were all in one club, protecting the same system that kept them all rich. So here is the question that ends this story. What happens when men march onto that field who were never in the club? Men who cannot collect a ransom, cannot read your colours, and owe your noble life nothing at all? The answer came on a wet October morning in the mud of northern France, and it was the beginning of the end. The morning was the 25th of October, 1415. The place was a soaked field near a castle called Agincourt, and by the end of that day, the beautiful system you have just learned would show its first deep crack. On one side stood the flower of French nobility. Thousands of knights and lords in gleaming plate, every shield a name, every name a price, exactly the rich captives the ransom game was built around. On the other stood a smaller, sick, exhausted English army under Henry V. And here is the part that matters. Most of that English army was not noble at all. They were commoners, archers, farmers and craftsmen carrying longbows drawn from English villages who owned no coat of arms and had no seat at the gentleman's table of ransom. The French came forward across a narrow, rain-drowned field, funneled between two woods, and the ground itself destroyed them. Heavy men in heavy armor sank into deep mud, packed so tight they could barely raise their arms, while arrows fell on them by the thousand. Knights went down and could not get up. The proud front ranks of France piled into each other and were beaten, captured, or killed where they lay, brought down not by their equals but by farmhands with bows. And then came the moment that still troubles historians. Midway through the battle, Henry believed a fresh French force was about to strike his rear, and he was holding a huge crowd of high-value prisoners. More captives than he had men to guard them. So he gave an order almost unthinkable by the rules of his own class. Kill the prisoners. His noble knights hesitated, and not only out of mercy. Every dead captive was a ransom, a fortune, turned to nothing in a heartbeat. So the king turned to the men who felt no such loss. He sent hundreds of his common archers to carry it out. The men with no stake in the ransom were the exact men willing to end it. That is the crack running through the whole system. The code of heraldry, the neutral heralds, the sacred surrender, all of it quietly assumed the people doing the killing wanted you alive and valuable. But a longbow cannot read a coat of arms. An archer 400 yards away, loosing into a packed crowd, cannot see your colours and would not be paid for them if he could. When a wall of arrows kills a duke and a nobody in the very same breath, the price tag on the shield stops meaning anything at all. And that is where this long story quietly ends. Gunpowder and massed common soldiers finished what the mud at Agincourt began. Over the next 100 years, a knight's painted shield slowly stopped being a matter of life, death, and ransom, and became what it is to us now. A decoration, a pretty crest on a pub wall, a family badge, a logo on a letterhead. The working machine had turned into an ornament. So go back with me to where we began. To that faceless man sealed in steel, a slit for his eyes, no way on earth to know who he was. The entire glittering system, the colours, the heralds, the fortunes, all of it existed to answer one question about him. Who are you and what are you worth? For 300 years, the coat of arms answered it, and answered it in gold. Then a farmer with a bow gave a different answer, and that answer was final. Under the visor, in the end, every man bled the same. Read the coat of arms, and you read a man's price. Until the day the price stopped being paid. If this changed the way you see a knight, and the medieval battlefield, even a little, then subscribe and stay for the next one. The past is far stranger and far sharper than they ever taught you.